So it's really nice to be back here, even just virtually, with my dear friends from Blue Gum Sangha. And I was struggling to remember the last time I saw you all. It's a long time ago. Must have been at least 10 months ago. It's almost a year. I remember a Valentine's Day talk, so it would have been a February thing. I can't remember if we met again after that. And so I've been a little bit busy gallivanting, traveling around the world and Australia in my new role as a wandering monk. So I'm like free as a bird. I've free-ranged my life, not like all those battery monks caged up in monasteries, not like all those people stuck in their cubicles, or I don't even know if that happens anymore. Is anyone actually working in a cubicle? Hopefully people are kind of working from home or from the beach or whatever. Hopefully they're free ranging their life too. But I've stepped out into the world after several years living with Bhante at the monastery at the end of the world and surviving several lockdowns with my dear teacher and friend. And now I'm kind of kicking about the world. And for me, this is part of my journey as a monk that I want to share with you. This kind of movement from being, I guess, a student to journeyman, I suppose you might think of it as. And this is an important stage for monks and nuns. We go from a time when we're dependent upon a teacher. This is called nisaya, dependence, where we have to do all sorts of jobs for our teacher. We have to learn all sorts of things. They have to look after us in certain ways. And then after a certain time, we become free, and then we're kind of on our own, right? The teenagers leaving the house, although I notice that teenagers last longer and longer now. And this this shift is a really important part of our spiritual practice. You know, not getting stuck in one place or one way of thinking, one teacher, even, that we remain open and that our practice doesn't stagnate but continues to grow. And we don't want to get too comfortable, right, in our spiritual practice. There's danger in comfort. There's danger in habit. There's danger in that nonchalance, that kind of it'll be okay attitude that sometimes we develop to our spiritual practice. It's like that comfortable shoe. You know, we start not to notice how worn out and smelly it's become. We sometimes need to reinvigorate our practice. And I suppose for monks, one of the way that we do that is we wander around. We deliberately put ourselves in different places, in different situations. At times, this can be quite challenging. For example, the Blue Gum Sangha do things in a certain way, right? I don't think anyone amongst you would say, this is the one true way. I don't think you do that. But often in our spiritual communities, this is what starts to happen over time as we do things a certain way. This is the one true way. There's a wonderful story about, I think it was a Christian community of monks or something, and they were meditating and doing their morning chanting, and there was always this cat that would come along and bother them. And so they would tie the cat up so that it wouldn't annoy them. And over time, somehow this became a ritual where they had to have a cat tied up to a post in order to meditate and chant, right? So this is what happens over time. We start to become a little bit habitual, a bit ritualistic, and do things in a certain way in our spiritual practice. And for a lot of us, that's comforting and helpful. Sometimes we need to be galvanized a little bit. We need to be thrown into the unknown. We need to see things in a different way, have our prejudices, biases, our habits challenged. And to do this, you actually have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to step out your front door, like the hobbits, and, you know, Bilbo Baggins, and kind of step out into the world and see what happens. And so this is part of my training as a monk. And so today I just wanted to share what I've been doing and some of the lessons that I've learned in the last few months. So some of you know I went to Thailand to do some intensive meditation practice in a place called Mae Hong Son, which was up in the northwest of Thailand. Very beautiful place. I'm not going to talk about that today because I want to share with you something that I've been doing here in Australia. And that is my new project called Little Dust. So some of you might know that I'm doing this already. And so Little Dust is a new project where I go into remote and regional communities across Australia to teach the Dhamma. So there's a website and there's all this information. And if you're interested, later on I'll share the link. I've got this blog where I kind of tell you what I've been doing, like this Newcastle death contemplation, or Dharma in Dubbo, visiting different places. And it's not just like a kind of like sharing my travel photos kind of thing. These are communities of Dharma practitioners that, unlike you, don't have the privilege of living in an urban environment surrounded by meditation groups, different monasteries, temples, having access to good teachers, and sense of community. So in the city, we actually are very privileged. There's so much meditation, Dharma, Buddhism, spirituality to be had any day of the week, right? Monday night, you go to Blue Gum Sangha. Tuesday night, you might turn up at this place. Wednesday night, they're doing a talk there. Thursday, you can go here or there. The weekends, there's this or that. And so any night of the week, you can access teachings. And sure, you can also do this online, like you could just download a talk or join in virtually like we're doing tonight. But people in rural communities also deserve like human to human contact, right? Human to human relationships and a sense of belonging to a spiritual community. And this was a big reason why I started Little Dust, was because when I went to those places at the invitation of these groups, they had little opportunity to practice the Dhamma, very little contact with teachers to help them with their meditation. And this really moved me. I'll tell you why it moved me the most was because they were so keen and enthusiastic, almost a little bit desperate, it seemed, you know, compared to the cool inner city types that I usually worked with, who, of course, are not desperate, not terribly thirsty, because you're being satisfied. You have regular contact with the teachings. You have a community. You have good teachers. You have a sense of belonging. You have a sense of progressing on the path. Whereas in a lot of these rural communities, they might not hear the Dhamma from a monk, say, for example, or a good teacher for another 6 months or a year. They might not come together with their community unless someone like me turns up and gives a reason. One important reason why that happens is just because of real estate. There's just no Buddhist or spiritual centers that aren't a church, for example, or quite often a Masonic lodge. And so real estate has a big role to play here, and the lack of equity amongst different religious groups having spaces to practice their spirituality. And this is something we also experience, I think, here as a minority religion in Sydney, the fact that we don't have centres, the fact that you meditate in a museum, wonderful though it is, it's not the same as in other parts of the world, right? It's certainly not the same as many Christian groups would have here in Australia. And so this is about access, and it's about privilege in many ways, the difference between the city and the country, the difference between majority religions and minority religions. And now in Australia, many of our rural towns and cities finally, thankfully, are becoming more multicultural. And there are a lot of groups of people from diaspora communities living in our regions now. And a lot of them are there for visa purposes. They get sent to these country towns. And they have, I guess, an experience that many migrants have of being disconnected from their usual cultural practices, language, cultural ceremonies, holidays, events, and importantly, estranged and alienated from their spiritual practice. And so I've been going out to these places and learning a lot about what it means to be a spiritual person in contemporary Australia and how this impacts our ability to practice and grow. And so one thing I just hope you have an understanding of is that you're really lucky. You're really lucky indeed to have access to good teachers. You really are lucky to have a community of great people who care about each other and help each other and support each other. And I hope that you have a sense of just how fortunate you are, the privilege that you have. The other thing I hope you understand is that conditions are changeable. Things are not permanent. Unless we nourish and support our communities, they can very easily disappear. The things that we take for granted can be taken away. And for a lot of the migrants to these regional areas, I think one of the feelings that I get from dealing with them is that they took for granted a lot of the things that were very important to them, such as having a place to practice where community can gather and a place where they can do good things and come together to deepen their spiritual practice. So conditions are changeable, and who knows how long Blue Gum Sangha will continue. Who knows what kind of future there is for meditators in Sydney as prices go up and people get pushed out, as people get older, people are less likely to continue doing things like volunteering, bringing groups together. Who knows what future we have? And we should, from time to time, reflect upon what kind of future we're creating together, because often what supports our spiritual practice is community. when we're alone, sometimes we can't trust ourselves, right? Some people need a community to do that 45 minutes of meditation every week that we just did. Many of you perhaps don't meditate outside of that time, but coming together, having that sense of community is what pushes your practice forward a little bit, right? And it's the same for a lot of people everywhere. They want to feel like they belong and they connect. And our human need for community is spiritual. And our spiritual communities need human contact. And so the very first thing I did this year, because Little Dust is a very new initiative, one of the things we do is we raise money to help communities come together by booking venues, like booking halls, community halls and things like that, so that people have a place to come together. Often this is like basic, but as you know from paying the fees at the museum, like this adds up, right? You know, you have to cover your costs. And another thing we do is we have financial hardship scholarships, so that people who are not wealthy, people who are on low incomes or on the dole or on they're casual, so that they can also attend things like retreats, because often it's the people who are, you know, further down the employment chain who most need the time off, you know, to develop their mind. And so we provide opportunities for people to practice. So the first thing I did with Little Dust this year was we went out to a place called Molong near Orange, and it was very hot. And the place that we had our retreat was very basic, not these luxury retreats that you get these days. It was like going back in time, back to the 70s, back to the 80s, where a lot of retreat centers were just, you know, tents, caravans, tin shacks. It's interesting to think just how things have changed and how now so many retreat centers will have like air conditioning, electricity even, or ensuite bathrooms. And for me, going to these places is often a step up, right? You know, wow, I get a big bed. Oh, wow, I get a nice bathroom attached. And this is much better than the hut in the forest sometimes. But this place was a Tibetan retreat center, and it was very basic. No electricity, completely off grid, just a little bit of solar. And it was really hot. And a lot of the city slickers that came along really found it quite difficult to practice. It was hot, it was sweaty. And so as I'm telling these stories tonight, just about the places I've been, I just wanted to share a simple lesson that I learnt from each of these places. And with this retreat at Molong, I learnt how we often think that our spiritual practice is going really well when our external conditions can be controlled by us. So when you're sitting there in your air-conditioned home, in your comfortable chair, with the lighting just right, it's easy, right? It's easy to get nice meditation because you're really comfortable. But take you out of that place, put you somewhere else where conditions are a little bit more challenging. What happens to your meditation practice then? How good are you really with meditation if you have to rely upon conditions to be perfect? Conditions are very rarely perfect. And this is why so many people want a nice retreat center or want to stay at home and do Zoom, right? Because it's comfortable. You don't have to interact with other humans who snore or fart. You don't want to have to deal with an environment that doesn't have the right temperature. And so if we rely upon external conditions all the time, we're not really going to make a lot of progress in our meditation practice. And when external conditions are not perfect, we're going to suffer. And so this is something that I feel I learned a lot about at the retreat, was our reliance upon controlling our external conditions. And the problem with that, I'm one of those people that often take myself outside into the forest to meditate. And I really recommend, if you want to see how you're going in your practice, going outside once in a while and sitting under a tree. Sitting under a tree sounds wonderful, doesn't it? So nice. Sitting under a tree means mosquitoes, sunlight coming at you from all angles, things falling on you, suspicious sounds in the forest. This really tests your ability to rest in the present, to remain calm, to let go. And so it's sometimes very good for us to do this, where we take ourselves out of our comfort zone and push ourselves into a different situation where we can grow. So this is what I learned in Molong. After that, I went to Dubbo. Have any of you been to Dubbo? It's a long way it's a long way, right? It's very different culture, very different place. And there I met a lot of people who were mostly of Sri Lankan community. And for a few days there, we did a lot of wonderful events. The people would invite me to their homes. They'd offer a big, beautiful meal. And then we'd have a Dhamma talk and do some meditation or something like that. But my favorite event was the event where I was invited to give a day-long retreat, just one day. And this was open to the general public, and it was a really diverse group of people who came along. And quite a few people had never meditated before. So this always kind of freaks me out a little bit, because I have no idea what their expectation is. I have no idea the quality of their mind, what their what's been going on for them in their life. There's not enough time usually to kind of explore these things before we start. And so anyway, I always ask, have you ever meditated before? And quite a few people had not. And so we sat down, we began, I gave an easy introduction to meditation, and it was about 20 minutes. So not too long, right? For newbies. And afterwards, one of the women said, look, thanks for the teaching, thanks for the meditation, but I think that's enough for me. And she left, right? She did 20 minutes of meditation. And it was really instructive for me to remember the mind of a beginner. Can you remember how you were before you started meditating? Now, after all these years of practice, now you know what to expect, right? You sit down and you know that your mind does these things, right? You hear the voices, you hear the dialogue, you are used to the waves of emotion. You're accustomed to your mind. You've gotten to know your mind over the years. You know what it's capable of, both good and not so good. You see the stuff that comes up in your mind, and you have begun, and for some of you have done a lot of work on training your mind. And you remember your mind before you started training it? So this woman, she obviously, the experience of meditation was incredibly confronting. And I think that's something that we should reflect upon from time to time, is the confronting nature of looking at our mind. How difficult it is, how brave you are each and every time you come to sit down. How brave, how courageous it is to sit with your mind. I'm remembering a guy I met in Malaysia when I was there a few months ago teaching a retreat. And he said to me, Bhante, every time in life my mind is fine. My mind is fine, it's good. But when I come to a Buddhist thing, like a day of meditation, like we were doing it, when I come to a Buddhist thing or to a retreat, for some reason, my mind is crazy. And I was like, you do realize that's your mind all the time. But when you come to a Buddhist place, you're sitting in meditation, you're looking at your mind, you're seeing it clearly. This is what goes on in your mind all the time. And he was like, oh, he found it really difficult. And probably it was the same thing with this woman who left the day retreat. She had never, ever looked at her mind before. And so I just want to share that with you, to acknowledge the good work that you've done on your minds, right? You're some of the very few people in the world who have done this work. Most people are just running around, never having looked at themselves, never having understood why they do this or they do that, or why their relationships go bad, or why people get upset with them, or people don't train their mind. And so you're very fortunate to have found a path where this is part of your life. And your relationship with yourself will have improved, right? Your relationship with others and the world around you, the truths of the world around us. Your relationship to those things will also have improved. And so, again, just to acknowledge, I guess, your privilege and how lucky you are to have had this opportunity to develop your mind. And I encourage you to keep going, to see what you can let go of and see what you can allow in, so that you can grow and deepen on this spiritual path. Let's see, and so after Dubbo, I just went up to Rockhampton. Have any of you been up to Rockhampton? So it's pretty far away from anywhere. And can you believe that there's also Dhamma communities up there too? Spiritual communities who are quite sincere in their practice and come together every week and practice meditation. And I was teaching some retreats there, giving some talks, and it was really wonderful to meet with the diverse communities in our regional towns. One group of people that I met with was a big Thai community. And these people had been practicing in Thailand, all these wonderful cultural aspects of Buddhism, like offering food to the monks, doing some chanting and all those sorts of things. And when we came together, they put out a big spread at this Thai restaurant, and they invited all their friends to come along. So there's a big group of people, like maybe 30 or 40 people came along. And there's a big sense of occasion. And so people came together in this way, which is always beautiful to see, because this is again about spiritual friendship and about doing good things with good people, surrounding yourselves with good people who inspire you and encourage you to practice a spiritual path. So they all came together, and it was like from little kids to old ladies, and some of the people came from Thailand, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, and a few white Australians in there too. And there was this sense of it had been a long time. It had been a really long time for these people to come together and do a spiritual activity. It'd been a really long time for them since they had been able to offer food to a monk, or do the chanting, or hear the Dhamma, the teachings. And they were a bit nervous, they were a bit worried that they would forget all the words to the chanting, that they would forget how to behave and what to do and what thing comes next in the ceremony. And when I talked to them about this, they had reminded them, you've been doing this since you were kids. For many people growing up in Buddhist countries, this is what you do. You go to the temple, you do these things, and it's an important part of your growing up. And for these kids, often, it's a very happy time. So their experience of spirituality and religion is often quite happy and fun, and it's about community. And when you change countries, of course, you leave all that behind. You can't do these activities anymore. There's something missing in your heart. And so when we were talking about this, they were reminded of their homelands. They were reminded of their youth. They were reminded of these parts of themselves that they had forgotten, that they hadn't been able to give expression to. And some of them began crying, thinking about this experience that is common to many migrants, of loss, of lack, of not fitting in, not having a sense of belonging, that your culture, your practices don't have the right grounds here to flourish. And so for me, that was very sad to see, but even for us, maybe we're not migrants, maybe some of us are, maybe we're not coming from a different culture or a different background, but our spiritual activities too can sometimes recede from our life. We get out of the habit. We move away from that center that was close to us and easy to get to. We stop going to our weekly meditation sessions. We stop listening to the teachings. We stop reading about meditation or Dhamma. And gradually, we move away from something that really mattered to us. We start to backslide a little bit. We lose the support of our community and our friends. And sometimes there'll be this little voice in the back of your head like, oh, you should go back and do that thing. You should go and do that meditation session. You should connect with that community. Because there's a part of you that remembers that it felt good, that it was important to you, that it mattered, that it helped you. And I see this a lot when I connect with Dharma communities or meditation groups. You see people come for some time, and then sometimes they fall out of the habit, and then they kind of get out of that community. And that's fine. Like, no one, of course, no one should be forced. Okay? No one should be forced to stay. And people are on a journey. But I just want to encourage you to maintain those connections to what matters in your life. And our spiritual practice matters. And it is difficult to maintain. It's not easy. It's difficult because the world is set up against us. You know, the world does not prioritize the spiritual. The world wants you to get overstimulated by advertising and spend your money and work hard to buy this or that. The world wants you to believe this or believe that. And spiritual teachings often go against the stream. They show us a different way of living. And they, importantly, ask questions of the things that we believe, the way that we've been living, the things that we take for granted in society. And so spiritual practice is sometimes very difficult to maintain in our lives. And I know that for myself, like I would often kind of go in, spin myself into a spiritual practice and then get spun out. And it's kind of like almost like this intoxicate cleanse kind of pattern where you end up forgetting a lot of the teachings or a lot of the things that were important. And then by the time you've kind of gotten intoxicated by the world again, you've gotten to a stage where you need to go back and cleanse out and kind of reprioritize again. And you know, I think this happens to a lot of people. We kind of spiral in and spiral out of our spiritual life. But for me, and probably for you, it didn't really help me until I prioritized my spiritual practice as part of my life, rather than keeping it as the last thing I would do at the end of a busy week, or I'll get to that meditation once I do all these other fun things, or you know, that kind of way we sometimes don't value our spiritual life as much as we might value, say, that series on Netflix or that brunch with our old friend, or you know, this or that. And none of those things are going to make you happy in the same way that your spiritual practice will. None of those things are going to transform your mind. None of those things are going to change your life. And so going into these communities, like in places like Rockhampton, where there's, you know, so little access. I had people from Mackay come to Rockhampton to attend my retreat. I had people beg me to stay and live there. You know, they really are so thirsty because they see how incredibly important these teachings are. They understand how rare and precious it is to have access to these teachings. And so they value it so deeply. Afterwards, these people who came from Mackay invited me to go to Mackay to give more teachings. They wanted their friends and family to benefit from these things. And, you know, that's all a bit overwhelming for me. But thinking about us here on this call, like, how do we value these teachings, right? How important are they to us in our life? What priority do we give them? Apart from our weekly meeting, what do we do to advance our spiritual practice? What are the opportunities that we have in our life to deepen our understanding of these spiritual teachings, to develop wisdom that's going to help us in our life, help our relationships, help others? What kind of priority do we place in our spiritual practice? And I mention that because I'm thinking about my time recently in Canberra, our nation's capital, where I spent some time in the Kamba temple, which is a Sri Lankan temple. And nearly all of the activities I did there were memorial activities, commemorative activities where we remember the deceased friends and family. They'll do things, this wonderful thing that they do in Sri Lankan culture, where you come together with a group of people, your family, your friends, 7 days after someone has passed, then 1 month, again, you do something good, like you offer some food or you make a donation, you do some charity, and then 3 months, the same thing, 1 year, the same thing, and then annually from then on. This is a very beautiful way to grieve, right? Much better than going down to the pub and just getting pissed. You come together, you do something good with family and friends in memory of the dead. So your grief over time lessens and is replaced by a positive association of goodness, charity, kindness, community. And you share the merits of your goodness with your friends and family who have died. And so in doing this, almost every day I'd be doing one of these ceremonies or one of these events with the community. Of course, it reminds you of the ever-present nature of death, right? You can't escape it. Everyone's going to die. And then, of course, it makes you question, how am I living my life? What is it I'm doing with my life? What am I learning? What am I putting out there in the world? How am I developing my mind? How am I treating others? Because if we don't do this work now, when are we going to? If we don't prioritize our spiritual self now, when are we going to? If we don't train our mind now, when? How can we expect our mind to become trained? And so this is why I'm talking about prioritizing our spiritual practice. I'm looking around at our dear friends here. I'm sorry to say, time is running out for all of us. Right? How are you living? Are you happy? Are there opportunities for happiness in your life that might come through your spiritual growth? And so part of my journey is all of those things, all of those lessons. And I just want to share with you what I'm doing next. So I'll be going down to the Southern Highlands to do some teaching. I'm actually going to be leading a retreat. There's a few places left. I'll put a link in the chat. So yes, this has all been a big advertisement. So what are you doing with your spiritual life? There's a few places left. Come along to a retreat this Easter weekend. You're more than welcome. But after that, I'll be spending some time in the forest doing my own retreat. And then I'm really excited to be going to Central Australia in May. I'll be going to a very remote Indigenous community called the Kalka township. And it's very, very remote. It's like, there's the border of South Australia, Northern Territory, Western Australia, Northern Territory. And so it's right in there, kind of hundreds of kilometers away from Uluru. And I'll be volunteering there with a community, several communities actually on the APY lands. And I'll be volunteering at a community center there. And this was important as part of my spiritual practice and as part of my role as a Buddhist community leader this year, because this is the year that we'll be voting on a national referendum on the voice to give our First Nations people a voice to Parliament through an advisory role. And So all of you, you're so wonderful. You're one of the first, I think, Buddhist communities to start giving the acknowledgement of country at the beginning of your meditation practice. And you saw that this was a spiritual practice that you were engaging in, acknowledging this country, and that you made it part of your spiritual practice. And that really inspired me the first time I came to your group. I was really inspired by that. And so this year, I'm reaching out to our First Nations communities as a Buddhist, as someone who wants to listen and learn, so that I can come back to communities like yours and tell you what I've learned, what I've been told, and to share with you whatever it is they want me to share. And so I want to encourage all of you to get involved this year. The Buddhist community is getting involved in letting people know about what's happening with the voice and helping people understand the process and encouraging people to support the voice. And you can get in touch with Gowan or the Buddhist Council and find out what they're doing to bring communities together so that people like you can help others in our community understand what's happening and can support our First Nations people to get a voice into Parliament. So that's not the usual talk I give, and I hope it's been okay for you to listen to this talk that's been all about me. But I hope there's some things in there that might resonate with you and inspire you on your spiritual journey, because I'm so happy to see you all. Whenever I get a chance, even online like this, I just feel like I'm coming together with my friends, with my Dhamma family, my Buddhist family, my meditation family. And it's so nourishing for me to feel connected. And so I just want this for all of our people, meditators, Buddhists, spiritual folks across Australia, to feel that connection. And so I think you're really lucky having this community. And I just want you to have all the best and to keep on flourishing and growing together.